First-person shooters as a genre have developed and changed drastically over the last 30 years, but not until the early 90s did they really take off as a developing genre. A notable game from 1992 being Wolfenstein 3D by id Software, the same people who made Doom. Goldeneye 007 for the Nintendo 64 was released in 1997. It was such a commercial success that by 2004 it was the most successful Nintendo 64 game in the United States. The controls in Goldeneye were a big push for first-person shooters to move to consoles. The Nintendo 64's analog stick would show that gamers don't need a mouse to play first-person shooters. Nintendo 64 controller's Z button adds a layer of depth as it immerses the player in the game to make it feel as though you are really firing a weapon. The stealth mechanics in the game were ahead of their time, as every enemy would be strategically placed and would react differently depending on the player's action, orientation, and weapon of choice. For example, the enemies would react or shoot at you when Bond made any noise. They would also duck and dodge to avoid incoming fire. The enemies would react differently depending on which areas on their body they were shot, would swat at flies while nothing is happening, and sometimes would even be found taking bathroom breaks. When developing the game, Rareware's priority was to make interesting levels. They also created the models of gadgets from the Bond movies and then tried to fit them into each level. They added the objectives to each mission later. These objectives gave players agency, as they allowed the developers to know what the player was going to do in each level. One of the game's developers, Martin Hollis, even stated that the benefit of this sloppy, unplanned approach was that many of the levels in the game have a realistic and non-linear feel. By this, he meant that many of the rooms in certain levels were left unused, much like they would be in real life. This added a real immersion factor to the game by giving the stages a believable feel. At the start of each level, the camera would move into the back of James Bond's head to show his line of sight. Coupled with how Bond uses his watch as a menu screen, added a level of depth, making the player really feel like James Bond. Goldeneye's multiplayer is its most critically acclaimed feature as a video game. Goldeneye's split-screen multiplayer mode was so well made that many first-person video games have fashioned their multiplayer around this. Almost every multiplayer first-person game today uses this fashion of gameplay. The sheer amount of options for the multiplayer matches were unprecedented at the time, and is by far its most valuable asset. Choices ranging from 5 different multiplayer modes, multiple weapons types, a handful of maps to battle on, and a huge array of characters. Goldeneye set the bar for multiplayer first-person shooter video games and still manages to offer hours of fun to players today.